Welcome to our deep dive into David Bohm's Wholeness and the Implicate Order.
Oh, yeah, this is a fascinating book.
It really is.
Mhm.
We're going to be going deep into this one, summarizing each chapter, so they can really unpack Bohm's ideas in detail.
I think that's a really good approach. It's a dense book,
It is.
but it's so rich with ideas, it's worth taking the time to really absorb it all.
For sure. So to kick things off, what is this book actually about?
Well, at its core, it's an exploration of how we perceive the world and how that perception might differ from how reality actually is, like what we see versus what actually is.
Okay, so it's getting into the nature of reality itself. That's a pretty big topic.
It is a big topic, and Bohm starts by dissecting the fragmented worldview that shapes much of Western thought. That tendency to see everything as separate and isolated.
Right, like the individual versus the collective, the mind versus the body.
Exactly. And Bohm argues that this fragmentation is deeply ingrained in our language, our science, even our perception of ourselves.
Okay, so how does this fragmentation actually play out in our lives? It's not just some abstract philosophical concept, right?
Absolutely not. Bohm links this fragmentation to many of the crises we face today, social, political, environmental.
Because if we see ourselves as separate from nature from each other,
Right. It becomes easier to exploit and dominate rather than to connect and collaborate.
that makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
So how do we even begin to challenge this fragmented worldview if it's so pervasive?
Well, that's what Bohm digs into in the first chapter, fragmentation and wholeness. He points to our language structure as a starting point, the way we use subject-verb-object to break down everything into these discrete units.
Oh, so the very way we use language contributes to this sense of separation.
Exactly. This linguistic structure, he argues, reinforces the illusion of a separate self and world.
So it's not just what we think, but how we think that contributes to this fragmented worldview.
Precisely. And it goes even deeper than that. Bohm argues that our obsession with measure further solidifies this fragmentation.
Measure, you mean like measurements? Quantifying things?
Yeah, focusing solely on those quantifiable external measures leads to a really rigid and limited understanding of reality.
Can you give an example of that? Like, how does that actually play out?
Sure, it's like trying to understand a symphony by analyzing the individual sound frequencies, without considering the melody, the harmony, the emotional impact.
Oh, I see. So it's about recognizing that there's more to the whole than just the sum of its parts.
Right. We can't just reduce everything down to these measurable components and expect to grasp the essence of what's going on.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It seems like he's pushing us to look beyond the surface, beyond the measurable, to grasp a deeper, more holistic understanding of reality.
Mm.
But if we can't rely on those traditional measurements, what does Bohm offer as an alternative?
He points towards the immeasurable. This concept, he suggests, is actually the primary reality.
The immeasurable. What does that even mean?
It's a concept that resonates with Eastern philosophies that emphasize the interconnectedness of everything. Like you can measure the physical properties of a tree, its height, its circumference, the chemical composition of its leaves.
Right, but those measurements don't tell the whole story.
Exactly. They can't fully capture the essence of the tree, its role in the ecosystem, its beauty, its symbolic meaning for humans.
So it's about recognizing that there's more to reality than what we can quantify and categorize.
Precisely. And while we can't directly grasp the immeasurable, Bohm believes we can move towards it.
How do we do that?
He suggests cultivating clarity and order in the field of measure, specifically through practices like meditation.
Oh, interesting. So by observing our own thought processes?
Yeah, we can become aware of the ways our thinking shapes our reality and start to loosen the grip of those fragmented patterns.
That's a pretty radical shift in perspective. Instead of trying to measure and control the world, Bohm is suggesting we need to cultivate a deeper awareness of how our thinking shapes our reality.
Precisely. And he even proposes a new mode of language to help us overcome the limitations of our traditional subject-verb-object structure.
Oh, wow, a whole new language. Tell me more about that.
He calls it the RIA mode, and it's all about emphasizing the dynamic flowing nature of reality.
The RIA mode. That sounds intriguing.
Yeah.
So how is this RIA mode different from how we usually speak?
Well, instead of prioritizing nouns and static qualities, it prioritizes verbs and processes. So instead of saying the rain is falling, you might say raining is happening.
Oh, I see. So it's about shifting our focus from static objects to dynamic actions.
Exactly. It's a subtle shift, but it highlights the ongoing process, the verb as the primary element.
How does this actually change the way we think and communicate?
Bohm gives some really thought-provoking examples. He uses the term to levate instead of elevate, signifying the spontaneous act of bringing something into attention.
Okay, so it's not just about lifting something up, it's about the act of noticing it.
Right. And to vividate expands seeing to encompass all aspects of perception, even understanding.
Wow. I can see how shifting our language in this way could really shake up our perception of reality. But how does Bohm apply this to concepts like truth and fact? Those seem pretty solid and objective, right?
That's where things get really interesting. In the third chapter, Reality and Knowledge Considered as Process, Bohm challenges that notion that truth is something fixed and absolute.
So truth isn't just this static thing out there waiting to be discovered.
Not according to Bohm. He proposes that both truth and fact are ongoing processes constantly evolving and changing in relation to a broader context.
So it's all about how things fit together, how they relate to the bigger picture.
Exactly. He even uses the term reconstitution, emphasizing the continual act of confirming or disconfirming a fact in light of new observations and experiences.
Oh, so like how the fact that the Earth is flat was reconstated as our understanding of the cosmos evolved.
Right. Our understanding of what's true is always subject to revision as our knowledge expands.
Okay, I'm starting to get a glimpse of the potential power of this RIA mode. It's not just about changing words, it's about changing how we perceive and interact with the world.
Exactly. And this ties directly into Bohm's assertion that reality itself, like knowledge, is an ongoing process constantly in flux.
So we're not just talking about changing our minds, we're talking about a fundamental shift in how we view reality itself.
Precisely. He challenges us to see the world as a dynamic interplay of thought and non-thought, where the lines between the two are constantly shifting and blurring.
Okay, that's a lot to unpack. So how does this all play out in practice?
Think of how our understanding of the universe has shifted over time from a geocentric to a heliocentric model, from classical physics to quantum mechanics.
Right. What we consider fact is always evolving.
Exactly. And this evolution isn't just happening out there, it's also happening within our own minds.
But wait, if reality is this fluid, ever-changing process, how can we have any stable knowledge? Doesn't it all become subjective and unreliable?
That's a great question. And Bohm addresses this head-on by emphasizing the role of intelligent perception.
Intelligent perception. What's that?
It's a mode of awareness that allows us to discern the relevance and fittingness of our thoughts in relation to reality. You know, like a radio receiver.
A radio receiver. What do you mean?
A radio stuck in feedback produces meaningless noise, but when it's properly tuned to a signal, it reveals a meaningful order originating beyond its own structure.
Oh, I see. So our minds can be like that radio, either stuck in our own internal noise or tuned into a deeper order.
Right, and Bohm suggests that this intelligent perception is crucial for achieving a harmonious relationship between thought and reality. In fact, he even suggests that our attempts to understand the ultimate nature of reality are part of this dynamic interplay.
Wait, so you're saying even our attempts to understand the ultimate nature of reality are part of this dynamic interplay of thought and non-thought?
That's exactly what he proposes. Even our grand theories, he suggests, are more like art forms, ways of organizing our thinking to achieve a sense of order and harmony rather than true copies of an objective reality.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. This is a whole new way of thinking about thinking itself. But how does this all connect to the actual science of physics? Bohm was a renowned physicist, after all.
Well, hold on to your hats, because Bohm's exploration of the implicate order gets even more mind-boggling when we delve into the quantum realm, and that's exactly where we're headed next.
Okay, bring on the quantum weirdness. I'm ready for it.
Okay, so we've explored some of Bohm's key ideas so far.
Yeah.
You know, like the whole concept of fragmentation, the RIA mode, this new way of speaking, and of course the implicate order. But how does he apply all of this to something as intangible and mysterious as consciousness?
Yeah, that's a big leap from ink droplets and local clocks.
It is a big leap, but Bohm doesn't shy away from tackling those big questions. In this chapter, he's proposing that consciousness, like everything else, is enfolded within the implicate order. Our thoughts, feelings, perceptions, all arising from that same dynamic process of enfoldment and unfoldment that we see in the material world.
So he's suggesting that our minds aren't actually separate from the universe, but rather deeply integrated into its fundamental fabric.
Exactly. Like, think of it like listening to a symphony.
Oh,
You hear a sequence of individual notes, right? But the experience of the music is way more than just the sum of its parts.
right. It's that feeling of flow, that sense of wholeness that emerges from the individual components.
Precisely. And Bohm suggests that our minds are constantly enfolding these individual elements, whether they're musical notes, sensory perceptions, thoughts, emotions. creating this unified experience from a sequence of distinct elements.
So it's not that the individual elements don't matter, but it's the way they're woven together that creates meaning and coherence in our experience.
That's a great way to put it. And this process of unfoldment, he argues, isn't limited to our internal experience. It also shapes how we perceive the world around us. For example, think about how we perceive motion.
Like watching a car drive down the street.
Exactly. We see this smooth, continuous movement. But from a purely analytical perspective, motion is defined as a series of points along a trajectory, a change in position over time. So how do we bridge that gap between this kind of fragmented, point-by-point description of motion and our actual experience of fluid movement?
It's like our minds are filling in the gaps, creating this illusion of smooth motion from a series of static snapshots.
Precisely. And Bohm suggests that this is exactly what's happening. Our minds are unfolding those individual frames of the moving object, creating that unified experience of continuous motion. He believes the same process operates in all aspects of our perception, seamlessly weaving together our sensory experiences into this unified and coherent whole.
It's like our minds are constantly creating a movie from a series of still images. It makes me wonder, though, if our conscious experience is so interwoven with this implicate order, where do we even draw the line between subjectivity and objectivity?
That's a great question, and one that Bohm grapples with in this chapter. He acknowledges that the implicate order suggests a much more fluid and interconnected relationship between the observer and the observed than traditional science has typically acknowledged.
So it's not just about the stuff of the universe, but also about how we as conscious participants engage with and shape that reality.
Exactly. It's a truly participatory view of reality. And this leads to a pretty profound shift in perspective. Instead of seeing consciousness as something separate and distinct from the material world, Bohm suggests it might be more like a process, a way of participating in the dynamic unfolding of the implicate order. We're not just passive observers, we're active participants in the ongoing creation of reality.
That's such a radical shift from that traditional view of a separate mind, observing a separate world. But how does this actually play out in our daily lives? How can we reconcile this idea of a fluid, interconnected reality with our experience of a world that seems solid and separate?
Well, Bohm dives into this in detail when he examines how we perceive time.
Time.
Yeah, he challenges that whole notion of time as this linear sequential flow, this straight line from past to present to future.
Okay, so back to the ink droplet analogy.
Exactly. The ink droplet seemed to disappear, but was actually just enfolded within the fluid.
Right.
And Bohm suggests that something similar might be happening with time. That linear progression we experience might be just a particular projection, a specific way of unfolding from a much deeper and more multidimensional reality. The past, present, and future potentially interconnected and enfolded within this larger structure.
So you're saying time isn't really a straight line. It's more like all moments are happening simultaneously.
That's a simplified way to put it, but essentially, yes. It's a mind-boggling concept, I know. But Bohm is suggesting that time as we experience it is a product of the way the implicate order unfolds into the explicate order.
This challenges so much of how we think about cause and effect, free will,
Mhm.
even destiny. If time isn't linear, what does that mean for our understanding of those concepts?
Bohm digs into that very question in this chapter. He suggests that the implicate order might allow for a more fluid and dynamic relationship between past, present, and future than we typically assume.
So you're saying that our actions in the present could potentially influence and even reshape the past. But how is that even possible? Wouldn't that violate the fundamental laws of physics?
From the perspective of the implicate order, it might not be as impossible as it seems. Remember, Bohm is proposing that the explicate order, the world we perceive, is just a particular projection from a deeper, more holistic reality. Imagine, like, changing the lighting in a room.
Okay.
The objects in the room don't actually change.
Yeah.
But the way we perceive them, the relationship to each other, it's all transformed.
So if we shift our understanding of the present, we're essentially changing how the implicate order unfolds, which could in turn affect how we view the past.
That's the idea. It's definitely a radical shift in perspective, but it opens up this whole new way of thinking about time and our relationship to it. It suggests that we might not be as bound by linear causality as we think.
This is blowing my mind wide open. But if time isn't this linear, straightforward thing, what is it? How can we even begin to grasp it outside of our normal, everyday experience?
That's the challenge, isn't it? To try to conceptualize something that transcends our usual categories of thought. Bohm suggests that we might need to develop entirely new concepts, new ways of thinking, to really understand time in the context of the implicate order. It might be like trying to describe colors to someone who's been blind their whole life. Our current language and thought patterns might be insufficient to grasp something that exists beyond those limitations.
It's incredibly humbling to realize the limits of our understanding, but it's also incredibly exciting to realize that there might be so much more to discover.
Absolutely. Bohm's work invites us to expand our horizons and acknowledge the vastness of what we don't know. And he doesn't stop at just consciousness and time. He goes on to apply these ideas to the grandest scale imaginable, the universe itself.
Okay, let's take that leap and explore how Bohm applies the implicate order to cosmology. What does he have to say about the nature and evolution of the universe? All right, so we've journeyed through Bohm's thoughts on fragmentation and consciousness and even time, and now we're stepping into the universe itself, applying the implicate order to the cosmos. That's huge.
Yeah, it is. Bohm doesn't hold back. He dives right into those big questions about how the universe began and how it changes and what space and time really are, all seen through this implicate order lens.
So where do we even start with something as massive as the universe? Like when we talk about space, what does Bohm have to say about that?
Well, he challenges this idea of space just being an empty void, just a backtrack.
Right, like an empty state.
Exactly. He brings up this concept called zero-point energy. It's a fundamental energy level that's everywhere, even in the seemingly empty vacuum of space.
Hold on, so you're saying even in those completely empty parts of space, there's still energy?
That's the idea. Think of it like a simmering pot of water. It's not boiling yet, but there's still energy there just below the surface.
Okay, so even in the emptiness, there's potential.
Right. A potential for creation. Bohm suggests that the zero-point energy is usually too subtle for us to notice directly, but we can see its effects in certain phenomena, like something called the Casimir effect.
The Casimir effect.
Yeah, it's this really weird thing. Imagine you have two metal plates and you place them really close together in a vacuum. You'd think they'd just sit there, right?
Yeah, nothing to affect them.
But what happens is they actually experience a force that pulls them together.
Wait, so the empty space is pushing them together? How?
It's mind-blowing, right? It turns out that the zero-point energy fluctuations are kind of restricted between those plates.
Right.
And that creates a pressure difference that pushes them together.
So it's like this seemingly empty space is actually a dynamic force.
Exactly. It's not just a passive backdrop. So how does this tie back into the implicate order? Bohm suggests that this zero-point energy and countless other potential energies and structures might be enfolded within the implicate order, just waiting for the right conditions to unfold into the explicate world.
Like a hidden blueprint.
Yeah, like a seed that holds the potential for a whole tree.
That's a cool way to think about it.
Yeah.
So how does Bohm apply this to something as massive and mysterious as the Big Bang? I mean, that's the starting point of the universe, right?
Well, he suggests that the Big Bang might not have been the ultimate beginning. Maybe it was just one stage in a much larger cosmic process, a process of unfoldment. Instead of everything exploding into existence from nothing, it's more like the universe has always been evolving and transforming.
So the Big Bang was just a really dramatic chapter in this ongoing story.
Yeah, a pivotal moment, but not the whole story.
Mm-hmm.
And this ongoing unfoldment, guided by the implicate order, might not just be happening in the physical realm.
Wait, so it's not just about stars and galaxies forming?
Right. Bohm even suggests that consciousness itself might be involved in this cosmic evolution.
Hold on. You're saying our thoughts, our actions, our very being might be shaping how the universe unfolds.
That's the radical implication of his ideas. It's a participatory view of cosmology. We're not just watching the universe, we're part of the process.
Wow. So if this implicate order is so fundamental to everything, how can we even begin to grasp something that big?
That's the beauty and the challenge of Bohm's work. It pushes us to the very edge of what we think we know. He suggests that we can get glimpses of the implicate order in certain experiences, like appreciating art or having those aha moments in science.
Those moments when everything clicked.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a different way of seeing, a different way of being in the world.
So it's about questioning what we think is true and being open to the possibility that reality is so much bigger than we can imagine.
Right. It's an invitation to explore, to go beyond the surface and discover what lies beneath.
This deep dive into wholeness and the implicate order has been a wild ride. We've gone from talking about fragmented thinking to exploring the universe and everything in between. It's a lot to process, but definitely worth the journey.
Yeah, it's a journey that continues even after you close the book. Bohm's ideas, they stick with you. They make you question everything.
I think that's the mark of a truly impactful book, when it doesn't just give you answers, but inspires you to ask even more questions.
Exactly. It's about that ongoing exploration. That's what Bohm was all about.
So keep those questions coming. Keep exploring. And who knows what you might uncover in the implicate order.
Exactly. The possibilities are endless.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into David Bohm's incredible work.
It's been my pleasure.
Until next time, keep those minds open and keep searching for the interconnectedness in everything.